I would like to start by welcoming everyone to the 2021 NDPC conference. We're so happy to be back in business after a year off. We have an amazing group of speakers we're going to hear from today, and we hope you enjoyed the swag box that you received. If you registered late, we're happy to say that we'll be doing another mailing, and you should receive your box in a day or two. Because we can't gather in person, we wanted to do something fun and just hope you enjoy the package that you received. This has been a busy year for communicators. The pandemic and important conversations about racism, diversity, and inclusion consistently are at the forefront of our communications. Now more than ever, we must urge truthful, healthy, and productive dialogue regarding all these topics in our workplaces. Newsrooms, government, and professional organizations. While these crises have forced us to pivot more than we like, we may not ever go back to the way things were. As you'll see in today's agenda, we'll focus on topics that will help us find new and innovative ways to advance the communication profession actively, thoughtfully, and respectfully. As we mentioned, if you're joining us late, we are currently looking for we have a couple open board positions. We're looking to fill the secretary and a director for our Southeast District, which is the Fargo-Moorhead Professional Communicators. If you are interested or know someone who might be interested, please let one of our current board members know. If you have questions about any of the positions, the officer duties are listed on our website about ndpc.org. Or you can reach out to me or ask any of the board members about the position. Once we fill the positions, we'll vote new board members in at our summer board meeting on July 22nd. If you're joining us late, I just wanted to reiterate that we're very excited to announce that NDPC will host the 2022 NFPW conference in Fargo. Our bid for the 2021 or 2022 conference was accepted in February of 2019. Typically, this event is held in June, but we've yet to determine the date. Yesterday, during our board meeting, we decided that our theme is going to be bold, be brave, and be legendary. Discover the possibilities of the new communication world. We are so honored to be chosen as the 2022 conference site. If you're interested in helping us plan this wonderful tradition, please let me know. There's a lot to be done. The last time North Dakota hosted was in Bismarck in 2002. And then to kind of speed things along, I just wanted to say a few thank yous right now in case some of you aren't with us at the end of the day. I'd like to thank all of our sponsors who are consistently stepping up and helping our organization out. Many thanks to Forum Communications, Bell Bank, the Grand Fork Herald, and AE2S for always stepping up and supporting our organization. With sponsorships, with allowing your employees to be part of our organization, we just really appreciate your support. I wanted to thank Valley Marcom for hosting today. Pam and Nikki, thank you both so much for all the coordination efforts. Thank you to Taylor for your talented graphic design. And thank you to all the moderators who are helping today. Becca, Andrea, Kaylee, and Taylor, we appreciate you keeping things moving smoothly and consistently today. Thank you to the Conference Planning Committee. We've been meeting bi-weekly since just before the holidays, and we're able to put together this amazing virtual event for you. Special thanks to Sarah Mutter for always helping us with all the technology, and to Pam Gibb for being our website superhero. Thank you to all of today's speakers. We're going to hear about some very important topics from some very talented communicators across the state. We hope you can stick around for the whole day. I know it's a long time to be on Zoom, but I promise it will be worth it. Now on with the show. Becca Kruger is our first moderator this morning. She is the Workforce Development Manager at the Grand Forks Region Economic Development Corporation. She is an active volunteer in her community, sharing her time and talents through the Young Professionals Advisory Committee, the Women's Fund Coordinating Committee, the Community Foundation, and others. She's also an independent business owner creating one-of-a-kind art. Thank you,
Thanks
Becca.
for having me here this morning, Sadie, and I am really excited to be able to moderate this panel. I know all three of these panelists in real life, and they're incredible humans, so I'm excited to listen and learn today alongside you. I'll go ahead and do some introductions to our diversity in the media session. First, I'll start with Hillary Kempenich. Hillary is a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa and a multidisciplinary artist, culture bearer, and advocate, emphasizing her work to empower Indigenous people. Hillary is an Anishinaabe multidisciplinary artist, cultural bearer, and advocate. The award-winning artist has immersed herself in sustaining her small business and continues her passion for community work. Raised on the Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation, she continues to advocate for better educational health and cultural standards through her work in both urban and rural settings. Hillary has a growing list of group and solo shows and collaborations, as well as receiving recognition nationwide. 2015 proved to be a very successful beginning for her career, marked by awards from the National Indigenous Child Welfare Association, Native Arts Gathering, and First Peoples Fund. Hillary received a second place ribbon in the prestigious SWAIA Indian Market in 2018. Her artwork has been published recently in Finish the Fight, a book written by New York Times author Veronica Chambers, and she continues to be featured in private collections, museums, and galleries throughout the US. Zazega Designs is a current extension of her work as a micropreneur. She earned a bachelor's degree from the University of North Dakota, and she serves on the Grand Forks Foundation for Education Alumni Network Board of Directors and the North Dakota Indian Business Alliance Board of Directors. She also serves as an arts and cultural consultant, and she lives in Grand Forks, North Dakota with her family. Next up, we've got Hamza Koriko. He is a professor of intercultural competence, diversity and inclusion specialist, and an honors faculty fellow at the University of North Dakota. Co-chair of the North Dakota New American Foreign-Born Immigrants Advisory Board, Hamza Koriko began his art career in Lomé, Togo, as a storyteller, drummer, playwright, and director. He went on to work in Europe and Africa. In Togo, he created a theater group and used art to help students get ahead in their academics. In late 2004, he moved to the US, and Hamza was a guest author at the 42nd Annual UND Writers Conference in Grand Forks. He published several plays in French, some of which were translated and read in the US, and was invited to the Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival in 2010. A former Peace Corps volunteer, Hamza has always been driven by the urge to assist people and address social challenges using his art. He has won many awards for community engagement and leadership, both nationally and internationally. A multidisciplinary artist and multilingual, he is a translator and interpreter, helping new Americans, foreign-born immigrants who speak French and Ewe. Hamza is a 2021 NEA Translation Grant recipient and founder and artistic executive director of the African Arts Arena. Last, but certainly not least, is Katie Dochtler. She is a Grand Forks City Councilwoman and owner-operator of Intersectional Resources, LLC. She owns and operates Intersectional Resources, which provides specialized education and training services in the area of diversity, inclusion, intersectional social justice, and implicit bias for large and small organizations. She resides in Grand Forks with her family, and she believes that the power of engagement, and she also enjoys working with and volunteering for various organizations and nonprofits. within her community. She's particularly interested in advocating for equitable leadership through intersectional framework. That's a mouthful. Katie is pursuing a Master of Social Work through the University of North Dakota and is serving as Ward 2 representative on the Grand Forks City Council. So I'm going to open up our discussion today by asking each of our panelists to describe their view of diversity in the media, which is a very broad question, but I think we'll start with Hamzat today.
Thank you, Becca, and thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be here, especially with my very good friend Hillary and Katie Darkula. And thank to the NDPC for inviting us. Usually when we talk about media, as Becca noted, it's a pretty wide range of things to consider. But on my end, with the relationship that I had with media growing up, far away from the US, I always see media as a space, a place to go and harvest good and truthful information. So because when I was growing up in Togo, we did not have access to truthful information. We have to rely on Western media. But what happened was some of the first encounter that we had back then with the media is pretty much through movies, maybe CNN, other international news media. And we learned to know people through that. So for instance, my first encounter with the First Native American community was to think that they are just like people running around. They do not have a sense of what is good or what is bad, because that's what the media taught me when I was growing up. And then I was like, oh, okay. And then the other one was pretty much like talking about the African American, for instance. And then we look, okay, well, here is a group of people who are just like this. And then when we talk about Asian American, for instance, okay, we say that, well, these are the group of human beings who are always math, IT smart, So I have to say that the relationship that I had with media is a little complex, and at some point a little disappointing now that I'm learning what media should really be. But that's not to say that we don't need media. We do need media. It's just like the media just need to do a better job not to put people into boxes, but because once you do that, you take away the humanity of a group of people. Whether you want Asian people to be seen as the smartest people in the world, you are taking away their humanity by doing that, for instance. Or if you just, trying to tell the whole world that Native American, they do not have things that other people have, which is not true, then, for me, media has failed or falls short of accomplishing what I expect the media to do.
Thank you. And Hillary, we'll go over to you now. Same question, how do you view diversity in the media today? So you are, muted at the moment.
Bonjour. Thank you, everyone, for inviting me today. This is really an interesting reflection on my experience with media. Growing up, our family kind of started out in poverty, so we had the one TV with maybe 2 TV channels, and those were reserved for the babysitters and the parents, and so we watched the news. So my access to media was quite limited. I mean, my familiarity with media growing up was newspapers. And so when I was reflecting on that accessibility, actually my first kind of experiences were negative. And that was because I was the first 2 experiences is when I was in kindergarten, a news reporter came into the space. It was the first day of school. Someone says, there's a news reporter. I didn't know what that meant, of course, but I was curious, and I looked back, and just as I looked back, there's a camera pointed at me. The next week, my face was on the cover of our local newspapers, talking about poverty in Indigenous communities. And even at 5 years old, I didn't like that representation. And going even further back, our family, I was a child that received Save the Children. And so that was another experience where I was having to expose my vulnerability. And since then, I guess that's kind of the impression, the lifelong impression that I have. And, you know, I am born and raised in North Dakota. I only lived in Canada for a short time, but seeing how we were represented, say, as in newspapers and in the media, was often negative. And still yet to this day, though we ask and request and we plead and we demand, we don't see those feel-good stories or seeing the multiple perspectives. Oftentimes, as an Indigenous person in a story, we only ask that one person their feelings, and so we're not getting the many perspectives. And trying to do a little bit of background work real quick just to kind of freshen up, I looked up what is media, and the first definitions were very negative, and that makes me sad because media is such an opportunity, but yet it still serves as gatekeeping to society. So I would really love to see the flip on that conversation and seeing how we as people working within the media can be changing conversations and giving opportunity to everybody.
It's a really interesting point, and thanks for bringing that into the conversation, Hillary. Katie, we'll go to you next. And how would you describe your views on diversity in the media?
Well, you know, communication, I don't think anyone would argue in this group, especially communication is a powerful tool. The ability to say and explain who you are in the way that you want to be seen and the way that you feel yourself to be is extremely important. And I think for a lot of marginalized communities, we don't have that opportunity. We are not given the opportunity or the platforms to describe ourselves, describe the issues that our communities are facing and the struggles that we have. I think that has come out very much within the last 10 years in a lot of the kind of social justice movements that you're seeing, whether it's missing, murdered, and Indigenous women, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's Stop Asian Hate. These are all movements that are coming to a head very publicly and out in the media, not because they didn't exist prior, but rather people are finding platforms that are being shared with them. Allies are amplifying voices that were already speaking for the generations past. And we're actually beginning to understand and be able to share these stories from a first person perspective, as opposed through kind of a white lens. Of a reporter coming in or a communication team coming in and putting their spin or their perspective on what we are feeling and what we are experiencing. And so I think that's a huge piece of how media is impacted right now in current times. I grew up with social media. I was in high school when YouTube was invented and rolled out. I think that, and most people I think would agree, social media can be awful, just god awful. Don't read the comments, just keep scrolling, but also a very useful tool. And I think particularly for marginalized communities, we have been able to find community, and we have been able to really use our voices in a way that has not been dictated on how and where we show up with the use of social media. And I think that that is extremely powerful because it allows, again, people to, you know, be empowered to use their voice in the way that is important to them and to connect with people that would help further a cause. Hamzat and Hillary both touched on, you know, some of the huge things that go on with media and underrepresented populations, with stereotypes and implicit bias coming out, whether we like it or not, in the way that our communities are talked about. or our brothers and sisters are talked about. Oftentimes when you see a headline and you know, even the words, the descriptive words that people are using in headlines in this kind of clickbait world are very strong. The implicit bias within those clickbait headlines is very apparent. Whether you are using language to humanize or dehumanize an individual based on the story, oftentimes, unfortunately, it runs along the color of the person's skin or the race that they identify with or religion, if it is not the dominant of the culture. And we also see a underrepresentation, I believe, of the same kind of perpetrator or bad guy from our dominant white population. And we see an overabundance of examples from marginalized communities, even though it isn't necessarily statistically the truth. Rather, those are the stories that are being highlighted. Mugshots ran, stock photos that make it worse. I remember when we were talking about or there was the push to ban refugee resettlement in North Dakota, there was a reporter who liked to show children's hands handcuffed behind bars when talking about immigration. It was a stock photo, but it was very implicit about what he thought immigrants and refugee resettlement was about. And he didn't actually have to even say anything, but it was quite clear. Again, the power of communication is so huge, and the way that we wield it when we are given the platform and the power to do such is important to remember to reflect on. You know, to keep your eyes open to detect what kind of implicit bias you may be projecting, to reflect on what it is and why it happened in your pieces, and then to reject it, to just reject it flat out. And you have to continue to kind of work that cycle in order to accurately portray diverse populations in media. And I think that's an ongoing thing. And the more that a diverse group of people are able to share their stories and be represented in media, that's going to help, but it's not the only piece. Work needs to be done on our white reporters and our white communicators as well.
So you've all gotten an opportunity, I think, to share some of your observations about how underrepresented populations are depicted in the media. But my question would be, how have these depictions changed over time? Have you noticed that they've generally improved? If so, in what way? Have they worsened? Same thing, if so, in what way? And Hillary, we'll go to you to start this discussion out.
This is the one question I struggled with. So when I was actually studying advertising and so on, and one of the very first things that we learned in class was that sex sells. And I feel that there's been a change where it's hate sells. So I want to say things have gotten better, but I think that's a little bit overly optimistic, as that we've got more accessibility to different media forms, and so we can have more choices as to who we are reading stories from and so on, and subscribing to and so forth. So I mean, I guess there's like this general exhaustion because there's just such a constant negativity, and a lot of times there's just everything's just so hate driven in the headlines that it's just exhausting just to even like click on a link or listen to the news. I actually had to keep the TVs out for the last few years because it was just not good for our home environment. So I had to be very careful as to what we could hear in our spaces, especially this past year with the pandemic. Our children are home more, so I really had to be cautious and aware of what was being put out there in the news, just to make sure the emotional, mental health in our home was good and stable. The perspectives as an Indigenous woman, as an Anishinaabe woman, I don't see that still yet making the news. And we're so tokenized, and and it's it's just, I guess I find it really challenging with the depictions, because yes, we're starting to see more Indigenous people that are more confident in voicing their opinions, but one Indigenous person doesn't represent an entire group, right? We have so many different tribes and ethnic groups, and even within, like, we might be from the same community, but our perspectives are going to be different. And so we're seeing very little of that research, is that we just tokenize, or decide one person is the voice for all. And I don't agree with that dynamic in the media.
And Hamza, how about you? What do you think about depictions, and as they've changed over time? You've shared a little bit of a unique perspective of being introduced to media through a Western lens. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
I have to say things are changing. Now, I like to tell myself that I still have to wait, because what we are seeing over the past, let me just go back, over the past 5 years, it seems like the media is heading in the right direction, right? As an artist, I usually focus on movies. When you see how far cinema, have come in, asking people not to paint themselves, to be Black, for instance, So we have to see all those progress and say that, okay, well, things are changing with the media. So now, is it something that is reactive to what we are seeing these days, or is it going to be sustainable on the long run? That's what I need to see. But so far, I think things are changing, and sometimes the media is even overdoing, right? So it's like me as a Black person, I'm a human being, so I don't need to be portrayed as the nicest person, the person who cannot make mistake. I'm even cleaner than the word clean, or those kind of things. So it's kind of come out sometimes fake, but still, at least I'm being given a platform to talk, right? And then, as Hillary mentioned, you also have to struggle with the concept of being tokenized, right? Do I have to refuse to go and speak up because I'm being given a chance, and I know the reason why I'm being given a chance? But so if I don't do that, so am I really helping the cause? Am I really, it's complex. It's like you asking for something, and then when they're trying to give it to you, the whole context around it just feel like, oh my God, am I really going there because of what I have in my head, or just because of the color of my skin? But at the same time, we also want the color of your skin, or maybe your sexual orientation, to be represented. So it's a little tricky, but I have to give that to the media, that the media is doing a pretty good job heading in the right direction. But now it's just a start. We'll see where it goes.
Mm-hmm. So you think heading in the right direction, but still work left to do, is what I'm hearing.
A lot of work.
Katie, would you agree with that assessment, or do you have a different view?
I think it's getting better. I have this conversation a lot in the work that I do in this upper Midwest community, that racism isn't the same. It's not quite as blatant, but we are, I think, if you've lived here for any amount of time, or if you were born and raised in the Midwest, most people know what Minnesota, North Dakota nice is, Midwestern nice. It's a very passive aggressive manner of avoiding any kind of controversial topic, or a topic where you disagree with someone on whatever issue that it may be. And I think that it continues to permeate even our media and our communications. And so it is an insidious thing. It's not overtly racist. Newspapers, reporters are not going to use very blatant derogatory terms. But again, going back to the nuance of the words that they're using to describe folks, if there's a white perpetrator, a young man, they may describe him as being a troubled but polite young man. The neighbors are all surprised that this would happen. They never saw it coming. Whereas the same, crime or issue committed by a young person of color, man, they may be described as not a good kid, a terrorist, always was looking for trouble, came from a broken family. Even in that just basic description there, you've already set up the reader and the community that is kind of taking in all that communication to think and behave in a certain way when they're reading through the article. And I think that's what we're currently tackling. And that's what we're trying to, I think many of our marginalized communities are trying to hold the media accountable to, is this portrayal. So yes, you may not be coming out and using a racial slur to describe my entire population, but when you utilize this kind of nuanced implicit bias in describing us, it does the same damage, whether we want to admit it or not. In the same text, using the stereotypes like a model minority, Hamzat kind of touched on that for Asian Americans, using this idea that a model minority is here, it erases the experience that many Asian Americans and Asians within the United States experience on a daily basis, whether it is just their everyday life, whether it's the portrayal that they get in the media, whether it's the discrimination that they face, because it's minimizing us to a group that equates our value to whiteness, our proximity to whiteness, as opposed to not being white and having our own experiences. And even saying Asians or Asian Americans is such a vast diaspora, it creates this monolith and makes people think that we are all the same. And again, that doubles down on this idea that we're not unique and our stories aren't unique. So I think that the media, if the media only portrays people in power and their schema as the baseline for the norm, what they're reporting and how they're reporting, it further ensures that discriminatory systems will continue as those individuals and marginalized groups aren't really given the opportunity to be considered the norm or to be desirable or their outcomes to be positive. That's not to say that there aren't more stories that are positive that are coming up in the newspaper, and we're seeing more diverse faces. I, again, attribute a lot of that to social media, and I attribute a lot of that to the coming of age of the internet, the interwebs, as my grandfather would say, that connects people and shows people that there's more than just what's outside their back door. And it's okay to grow up and want to stay in the communities that you're in. That's a very common thing for those of us who've grown up in the Midwest. I grew up just 2 hours south of Grand Forks in Fergus Falls, and I've been here since pretty much 2005. I understand wanting to stay next to family and wanting to stay in these areas. I also have the unique experience to understand that as a person from a marginalized community, that not being able to see yourself portrayed in a positive light as on a regular basis and on a regular way, as opposed to just the pockets of excellence or the feel-good stories, is really damaging. It really does a number on your psyche. And as a child growing up in that, it's really important, I think, that communicators take responsibility for what we're putting out in the world.
Thanks. And I do want to just give a reminder to our audience. We have some incredible experts on this topic here. So if you do have questions that you'd like to see addressed, please feel free to put them in the chat. And as time allows, we will cover some of those questions. But I want to go back, Katie, you mentioned language several times and the way in which words are powerful tools as artists, as public figures, and those of us working in the public sphere. We know that language is extremely powerful in how it's used. So I'm interested to our panelists, what are your thoughts on language usage, and in other words, what constitutes respectful terminology and what terms should be avoided. And so Hamza, maybe for you, the writer of the group, perhaps we could start there.
Well, I mean, I wish we can play a game right now. So, well, it's not going to be a game. I'm just trying to give everybody here how should I put it? How we've been trained to see the world. So for instance, if you hear the word Muslim in the news, the next thing you should be expecting will be terrorists or jihad or something. When you hear the word, let's say Mexican, you wanted to quickly attach the word drug to it, because that's how we've been conditioned, right? When you hear, maybe a Black person, then the next word might be something like, oh, shooting or something, So these are not being done out of nowhere. It's a way to condition people to tell the rest of the world that, okay, if you see this type of person, this is what they're likely to do or to become, right? And the danger in that is, I'm not sure if the media intentionally is doing it, but it's having a very negative effect on people. I went to Armenia. The first thing that some of my good friends, they asked me is, okay, do you have some stuff, in your room? Meaning, do you have some drugs that I can come over? They've never met me before. They don't know me, but the media did a great job portraying a Black man like me for the rest of the world. Okay, well, the first thing we can be, if we don't play ball, then we have to be a drug dealer or something. So, and again, we have to be really careful, because words are the most powerful tool human beings have. And when I do understand that the panel is not to go after or to attack the people who are working in the media. We also know that they do have a power structure where you have like the executive producer who decide what gets out, what doesn't get out. So I know people are trying to do their job, but the media, the term media, which for me is pretty much like giving some sort of pass, because media doesn't talk, right? It's somebody in the position of power that kind of decide what needs to get out, right? So maybe we should be talking about media, or maybe talking about the people who own those media, or the people in the position of power, right? So we have to be really careful. I don't want to get into discuss analysis here, but as Katie said, we have to be careful the word that we use. You don't want to over celebrate somebody. At the same time, you don't want to under celebrate somebody. If the first thing that you wanted to do is all about respect, then the word will come to you. If the first thing you wanted to do is to show the humanity in people, then the word will come to you. I don't think there is a specific vocabulary that we can say this, 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 this. You just have to go into talking about people from being kind to the person. And I always looking for those little mistakes and trying to use it to define a whole race or a group of people.
And so, Katie, going back to you, do you think there are terms specifically for our media friends who are listening right now that are respectful, or language that is respectful? And how can we help phrase things in a way that's empowering to folks of color or of different backgrounds?
So Hillary and Hamza, feel free to jump in. But most folks are going to identify in a very specific way, and it may not be what you thought it was, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're being offensive or wrong. It just means that they may want to identify differently. So for example, if you're talking to a Black person, they may identify as a Black American, or they may want to identify as African American. as long as you are listening and respectful of their wish when you're writing something down, go with that. That's perfectly fine. If you are unsure, it's perfectly fine to ask in a respectful way, how would you like for me to identify you? With that said, keep in mind, does the identification of the race matter? Is that the story? Oftentimes, again, the header is Black man does, Asian woman does. It never says white man, white woman does. It just says man or woman. Why is the race the identifier in that? It may seem like a subtle thing. It may, when you're talking about achievements, it may feel like the right thing to do because you want to highlight their race and that it's not just white people. But at the same time, and Hamzat touched on this already, it minimizes the success in a way. It may be true and you can mention it, not as your leader, mention it further down in the article, but not as the lead. Be proud of the person and the achievement that they made or the good thing that they did in that instance. I think it's also important to, again, I see there's a question in the chat box asking about tangible things you can do to incorporate diversity. And again, going back to that detecting, reflecting, and rejecting, constantly going through this idea of, does this article show implicit bias? What am I not seeing here? The beauty about media is oftentimes you have an editor, and depending on the day, you might not say it's a beauty. But the beauty of that is that it's not just your eyes that are looking at something and reading it, it's multiple people. And so if everybody goes in with that mindset and that understanding, things are caught, words are changed, the language is improved, I believe, to be more inclusive and to be more understanding of diversity as a whole. It's not that we want you to say, okay, I have a story on a Native person, I have a story on a Black person, I have a story on a white. We don't want you to quantify diversity. Diversity, the goal of anyway, is so that it just is. It just exists. You see your community, you see all the people in it, and you highlight the stories that matter to the community. And it's not that you're identifying them by their race and you're not checking off how many stories you have at X amount of days. I think that is really important when you're using language. And again, when you're describing what's going on, are you looking to and this happens a lot from what I see in media anyway, when you're talking about especially minors, children, white children and children of color. Children of color are often aged up. Immediately they become adults. I have a 13-year-old daughter. She, in a lot of ways that I've seen media describe Asian girls, would be immediately aged up to being an Asian young woman. And while she may like to be called a young woman, she's not. She's still very much a child, and she should be treated as such, and she should be cared for as such. When we do this, we dehumanize our children, especially our children of color who are already at a greater risk. And so again, that's just an implicit bias piece that if you are in a position of power or privilege, you need to be conscious of, and you need to continually work on, because it's not going to change overnight. All of us have implicit biases in our lives that we have to work on, myself included. I am not perfect. You can ask anybody that I work with. You can ask Hillary, Becca, or Hamzat, or my family. Not perfect. But the idea is that you recognize that and you continue to work on it. You allow the people to say to you that you trust, hey, that doesn't sound right. Can I explain why? Or maybe you should think about this. And then you take the time to really reflect on that and then change accordingly moving forward. That's the only way that I see media really getting better, to the point where reporters and communicators, we don't have to kind of sit on the edge of our seats and worry that we're saying something wrong, in the sense of worried that somebody's going to call us a sexist, or somebody's going to call us a racist, or somebody's going to call us this, because we have a lens of diversity that we're using to write, and a lens of diversity that we're using to emote whatever it is that we want to get across.
Yeah. And so Hillary, I am interested in your thoughts on language. We do only have a couple of minutes left, but I'm also going to pose the question about those tangible examples. What should reporters and others who work in the media be cognizant of or keep in mind when they're covering issues? And so I'll start there with you, Hillary. Hold on a second, just the mute button.
Got it. So I'm just going to echo everything that Hamza and Katie said, it like 100%. My addition to this is, okay, so I use the term BIPOC, and that is not a universal term. It's not necessarily widely accepted. BIPOC means Black, Indigenous, people of color. Mainly because I don't care for words like marginalized and everything because of the negative stigmas attached to that. So when, when we're talking about race and ethnicity, I will tend to use that term. If we really truly want to be aware of the words and how we're approaching stories and everything, is we need to see more BIPOC journalists. We need more BIPOC leaders and editors and so on. And so whatever, whatever spaces you're working in, are they inclusive? Are we seeing these people being represented so that they actually are part of those communities and cultures, so that they know how to approach it, how to ask the questions. And we need to be doing this without tokenizing and baiting and patronizing those people that work within the media. That's giving us space to create our narratives and how they're approached in whatever medias that we're using.
That's a really interesting point, is even the structures of media organizations themselves. Are they conducive to bringing diversity right into their very organizations through boards of directors, staff, and leadership? Hamza, do you have anything that you think you'd like to add on this? What are some of those tangible takeaways that people listening could take along with them when talking about how do you cover issues relating to underrepresented populations?
I think one main thing to do is to make sure that you have an eye within the leadership that look at what you wanted to put out there. I'm just trying to avoid using those, like some of those technical terms to just talk, plainly. So for instance, if you write an article on Hamza, for instance, and today I intentionally decided not to dress like in some of my African attire that I love. And then I did it on purpose, because when people invite you as an African from Africa to do, they expect you to put something on, and then it's like, oh, we want something African. I have no idea what that means, because some of those things that they say something African, they're made in China. So you wanted to make sure, so if you want to take a picture of somebody who is a professor, who is a medical doctor, or who is an artist. So when you are writing the article on that person, have an outside eye from that community, say that, well, how do you see, the way we, the picture that we use, all those kind of things. Then that person will tell you that, oh my God, yes, I know why you're doing that, but 90% of the people in that country, they don't wear that anymore. So why would you want to pretty much like musify the way people dress, So those little things are just steps. I know it's going to take more time. I know it might even require paying somebody who is an expert in the field to look at those kind of things, but that's what it takes to change. But I don't think there is a way, or there is a toolkit where you open it and then you just have to just become a better writer, a better journalist that talk about, some of the issue as it relates to minority people. You just have to do your own thing. Go and watch some of those the documentary movies on community,
Sure.
Those little things.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is a lot of educational resources already exist out there. Thank you, Hillary, for putting that in the chat for everyone. And learning over time and doing the intentional work. I honestly could talk to you all about this subject all morning, but we do have another agenda. And so instead of talking, I'm going to thank you. Thank you for sharing your time with us this morning. Thank you for having this open and honest, hard conversation sometimes to have. and we certainly appreciate you. I'm going to kick it now over to Sadie for next steps on the conference.